and my life is like a lamp to a world that is searching for the path. We have become the example of Christ, and we are now the light of the world. Can the world see the radiance of Christ in you?
Evangelism does not happen by accident. Discipleship does not happen by accident. If we're going to fulfill our God-given mission as a church, we need to be intentional and reach out and share and introduce people to Jesus Christ.
Africa is an amazing continent with 50% of its population under the age of 18. If we impact the children, we would have impacted the future of the church and the future of our world.
Each one of us has something to bring to the table. Are you willing to release your resources? Surrendering your material goods or your gifts and talents or your time or your heart? What are you going to do?
If we're going to plant the 300 churches, if we're going to reach out to 1 million people through evangelism, if we're going to disciple 100,000 in this nation, and if we are going to have an impact with the poor, with the needy, with children, with all the others who are part of our communities around us, it's not going to happen unless you have committed yourself to the purposes of God and you have been faithful to live by those purposes.
Let me now turn our attention to God's Word, because I'd like us to conclude the series on generosity that we've been going through. Next Sunday, we're going to begin a new series. The title of the series is God at Work. And we're going to look at, for the next 7 weeks, we're going to look at every sector of our society and how I, in the sector that God has allowed me to be in, make a difference and become an ambassador for Christ. How can I see my work as actually God's mission to transform and to change the world? That's what we're going to be focusing on for the next few weeks, beginning next Sunday. So we'll address and touch every sector of our economy moving forward in the next few weeks. And I'm really looking forward to this series that we're beginning next Sunday, God at Work. But for now, let me conclude the series on generosity. Our final sermon is titled, Enough is Enough. Okay, so please turn to your neighbor and tell them that. Enough is enough. Enough is enough. Now, many times we say that in anger, all right? Enough is enough, okay? We say that that way. But for this particular sermon, I'd like us to change the tone. Same phrase, but change the tone. And the tone is enough is enough. Okay? We're looking at enough. Enough is enough. Have I said it with the right tone? Please help me. Now change it with your neighbor. Just help me and change it. And tell them enough is enough. Okay? Enough is enough. We want to look at the concept of enough, because this concept of enough is one of the hardest concepts to grasp in life, because it's one of the most elusive things to come in contact with. When do you say it is enough? For some of us, when there's a buffet, that's the hardest time to be able to say it is enough. Now, each of us have a weak point. You know, in some areas, there's no problem. But there are some areas where you can't quite have enough. Okay? Now, I'd like us to look at this word, enough, and actually ask ourselves the question, what is enough for me? What is enough for me? When can I say I am satisfied? When can I say it is enough in whatever area of my life? Now, many of us have heard the Kenyan dream. The Kenyan dream is to have 1 wife, 2 cars, 3 children, a 4-bedroomed house, a 5-acre plot, a 6-figure salary, and we've added a bit more. We've added to go and to grow to 70, not 104. I mean, that one is bonus times, I don't know how many. To grow to 70, that's number 7. And recently, because of the great developments that are happening, we've added to live next to an 8-lane highway. Okay? And we could go on and on and on. But there's a Kenyan dream. There's something that we as Kenyans aspire to. There's something that each of us desires to have, to possess, to own, to achieve, to reach in life. And many times this desire is so that we can provide for the needs of our family. We can provide for our needs. And that is such an honorable desire. But too many times, such an honorable desire later on becomes relegated to an endless pursuit of happiness, an endless pursuit of possessions, an endless pursuit of material possessions, to the point where our culture has redefined enough for us. Our pursuit for enough has now changed to a pursuit of excess. And we are seeking to amass and amass. And at the end of the day, if you asked anybody, what is enough? We've reached a place where we cannot define what enough really is. Advertisers work very hard to define or to redefine for us what enough is. Because for someone to be successful in advertising, the way they are successful in getting me to get a product is they need to ensure that they make me feel as if I'm missing out on that product to the point where I desire the product. They create in me a desperate need for it. They allow me to focus on what I don't have, and later on, purchasing it just becomes a matter of time. And the more we see a lot being advertised around us, especially with online marketing being one of the fastest growing areas of marketing right now, it's always on my face. Something is always on my face at one point in time or the other. The question I want to ask us is, have we now become artificially controlled by a self-serving entity that has now redefined my and your understanding of what enough is? And has it begun to generate in me an insatiable desire for something more than I actually have? And at the end of the day, I don't even know why I'm going for it. Has our generosity and has our ability to enjoy what we presently have become so elusive because we are pursuing a totally different definition of what enough is? We all live in a more world where we seek to have more money. We want more gadgets. We want more furniture. We want a better house. We want a better car. We want more clothes. We want more shoes. We want more success. We want more degrees. And this week we want more hugs. And it's going on and on and on. And we are in an endless pursuit of more. But the question I want to ask us today is, what happens when you get more? So what happens when you actually get more? You see, for many of us, it's impossible to satisfy our hunger for more. And instead of finding satisfaction in our quest for more, what happens is we find ourselves in a place of bondage to the more that we're actually pursuing. We are pursuing now more money to get more. And we find ourselves in an endless pursuit of more. It is actually bondage at the end of the day. And our goal, yes, was to attain enough. But because enough has been redefined, our goal is seemingly never achieved because enough has been redefined for us and we find ourselves in bondage. Instead of enough, we find ourselves pursuing excess. And we have excess on the outside, but unfortunately, at the end of the day, our excess on the outside actually reveals our emptiness on the inside. And we find ourselves hollow, without meaning, without purpose in the things that we're pursuing in this world. And we get hollow. In fact, the image that comes to my mind is the image of someone who's constipated. Someone who has consumed more than they need. And at the end of the day, what results is discomfort. You experience discomfort in life because you have consumed more than you need. And in fact, in some instances in constipation, you start smelling bad. And my life starts smelling bad as a result of my accumulation of excess, more than I need. And I try and consume it all at the same time. The point I would like to make as we conclude our series on generosity is my generosity will only begin at the point where I define what enough is. It is only at the point where I define my enough that my generosity can begin. And too many times we have not gotten to the point where we define that this is enough, so that it can give me the opportunity to cross the line and allow myself to now be generous because I have enough. Are you at that point where you need to draw that line in your life because as we speak, that line does not exist? Do you want to break free from the bondage of discontentment that the pursuit of things and materialism in this world creates? Are you at that place in your life where you want to break free from the pursuit of more so that you can experience freedom in life for a change, for once, where I'm not pursuing things? Are you at a point in your life where you want to now develop a new pursuit? Not a pursuit of these material things that many times we find ourselves in, but a pursuit of meaningful generosity. Do you want a new pursuit in your life? The point I'd like us to make today is that discontentment that comes from not defining enough and continuing to pursue more, discontentment can be a very dangerous thing in life. It can literally destroy your life if you have never reached a place where you're content with what God has blessed you. Let me give you an example. Adam in the Bible, Adam and Eve, Adam lost paradise. He lost that amazing place that God had given him and everything that God had blessed him with. He lost it because of discontentment. Adam and Eve had been given all that was in the Garden of Eden by God, and they were simply told, do not eat of but one tree. Everything else is yours. Everything else is yours. But do not eat from this tree. What happened to Adam? He saw an advertisement. There was a serpent that came and told Adam, what? You have been told not to take of this tree. This is the tree in the garden. And the minute this advertisement came in form of a serpent to Adam and told him that he's missing out on the tree. You're missing out on this thing that God is withholding from you, the very thing that you need. It immediately resulted in discontentment. And it is that discontentment that made Adam focus away from all that God had blessed him in. Away from the entire garden, he made the object of his focus the one thing that he did not have. And it is his focus away from all of God's blessings and focusing on the one thing that he did not have that resulted in his downfall at the end of the day. He suddenly experienced dissatisfaction with the many things that God had blessed him with. in the pursuit of satisfaction around the one thing that he did not have. That is the destructive power of discontentment. And I'd like us to look at contentment today, because it is that contentment that allows us to be able to say, enough is enough. Enough is enough. Let's turn our attention to where Paul addresses this topic in Philippians chapter 4. Let's go to Philippians chapter 4. We'll be reading from verse 10 to verse 13. And then later on, I'd like us to read from verse 4 all the way to verse 9. We'll read that later on. So generally the whole of Philippians 10, but allow me to start later on in verse 10 of Philippians chapter 4. Philippians chapter 4 verse 10 says, I rejoiced greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed you are concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. Now, Paul writes this letter to the church in Philippi while he is in prison in Rome. Because while Paul was a prisoner in Rome, he was chained to a Roman soldier. He was going through a difficult situation physically. Paul was barely surviving. He didn't have supplies of food and clothes, and he was barely surviving in prison. And the church in Philippi found out about this, and they sent a man called Epaphroditus with supplies from the church in Philippi to Paul. Epaphroditus came and met Paul in prison and spent an extended period of time with him, encouraging him and giving him the supplies that the church had given. Now, when Epaphroditus was going back to Philippi, Paul writes a letter to appreciate the church for the gift that they sent of supplies to him and how they took care of him in prison. And this is the letter in Philippians that Paul sends back with Epaphroditus. But in the passage that we've just read, we see two very clear principles that Paul brings out to help us be content with the things that God has blessed us with, so that we can begin our generosity journey. The first thing, I call it the principle of the blind side. The principle of the blind side. In Philippians chapter 4, from verse 11 to 12, we see him saying, I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. The principle of the blind side is Paul is telling us you need to choose what to put out of view. You need to choose what not to make the object of focus in your life if you are going to be a content man and a content woman. If Adam chose to put out the tree and to focus on the rest of the garden, it would have resulted in contentment for the rest of his life. And Paul is encouraging us in the same way right here in this passage. In Philippians chapter 4, verse 11 and 12, he mentions the word content several times, or contentment. Now let me just give us the meaning of this word. In the ancient world, there were cities, and whenever an army wanted to siege or to lay siege on a city, they would go to the city and look for the supply line for the city. Wherever the city used to get water or wherever the city used to get food, they would go there and attack that place and completely block it so that the city does not get any supplies. And the way they would besiege this city is wait for the city to starve. When the city is starved and the city does not have water, the city does not have a choice but to open its gates so that these people could lay siege. They would starve the city down. But there are some cities in the ancient world that you could not do that because the city had a source of water. The city had a source of food. Those cities were called self-contained cities. And the word literally in the original is the word content. Contained. It's a city that had its own supply. The principle here is that kind of city that has its own supply did not depend on external circumstances for its supply. You could not bring it down because of the external circumstances that you created. And Paul uses this image in this passage to say that I am like that city. I'm content. I'm not dependent on external or outer circumstances for me to feel like I can survive or to feel that I am well. I am okay. It's not my external circumstances that determine my welfare. And he says the first thing that you need to do is to turn a blind side to circumstances. Because if you allow circumstances to drive your life, they will determine whether you're content or you're not content. Regardless, Paul is telling us, regardless of what the world says, regardless of what advertisement says, you can get to the place in your life where you don't run after circumstances, where you don't run after the things that this world hurls at you. Because you get to the place where you say, I have enough. That will not make me feel more satisfied. I am satisfied with how God has already blessed me. For some of us, we think contentment comes with the absence of problems. So when I don't have any problems, that's when I feel content. Paul is saying something totally different. Look at his situation. He is in prison. He is captive. He is lost. He's completely lost his comfort, He has lost his freedom. He's at a place where he's surviving. He's basically surviving. He's existing on bare minimum. None of us would want to be where Paul was. But look what Paul says earlier on in the passage, the same chapter. He starts in verse 4. He says, rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all, because the Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything. I mean, in prison, you have every reason to be anxious. You don't know where your life is going. He was about to be executed. But in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests known to God. And the peace of God. He's telling the church, I am experiencing the peace of God. I'm not dependent on the circumstances around me. And the peace of God, which transcends all human understanding, is the one that is guarding my heart and my mind in Christ Jesus. Then he tells the church, finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent and praiseworthy, think about these things, because these are the things I'm thinking about. I'm not thinking about my hatred for the Roman emperor, or my hatred for the oppression that is happening upon believers. I have chosen what to think about at this time so that I don't complain about my situation, so that I appreciate the provision of my God and appreciate what God has done. And then he says, what you've learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put into practice. And he ends by saying, and the God of peace be with you. This is a man who had known what to turn a blind side to. Because his ability to turn a blind side to these circumstances or situations is what helped him rejoice in every situation. Here is a man who is free from anxiety, a man who is free from worry, a man who is guarded in his heart by the peace of God, a man who has learned how to be content. Here is a man who in every circumstance has found that God is sufficient and God satisfies, and he has put his confidence in none other than God, because God has never forgotten him, because God knows the number of hairs on his head, because God understands everything in his life, because God knows he's rising up and he's sitting down, God knows he's coming in and he's going out. He believes it, and he allows his heart to order itself around the truth of who God is. The first thing Paul is telling us is, guys, let's turn a blind side to circumstances and situations that may make us discontent. And the second thing is the principle of the inside. The principle of the inside. Verse 13. He says, and this is a verse we all know. Together I can do through Christ who gives me strength. This is the principle where Paul says, focus on what you have. Focus on what you have. You need to learn. I need to learn how to be satisfied with the little if you're ever going to experience contentment in this world. He says the biggest lesson of contentment is to learn how to be satisfied with little. Because if you learn how to be satisfied with what you have, regardless what God gives you or does not give you, your state of contentment will remain. For some of us, we think that our contentment will come with what God blesses us with. And we realize only too late that the only thing that happens is I scale up my discontentment. I don't become more content. The more God gives me, the more dissatisfied I get because I've just scaled up my discontentment instead of allowing myself to first get to a place where I am content with a little. If I cannot enjoy that one room that I'm living in now, I tell you I'm not going to enjoy a 4-bedroomed house or an 8-bedroomed mansion. I will not enjoy it. If I cannot enjoy the one shirt I own right now, I will never enjoy a wardrobe of shirts. It will never happen. If I cannot enjoy the one cup in my house, if I cannot enjoy the one pair of shoes, if I cannot enjoy the one meal I can get every day, if I cannot appreciate it and get to the place where I'm content with it, if I cannot enjoy the 100 shillings in my pocket now, I will not enjoy the 1,000 I'll get. I will not enjoy 1,000,000. This is what Paul is saying. Paul is saying it begins with your ability to appreciate the little that God has given you. The principle of the inside. Are you able to thank God for what God has already given you before you wait for that which he has promised you? Paul chose to focus on what? I can do all things through who? Through Christ who gives me strength. To be very honest, I think the reason why he said that is because Christ is all he had at that point. And when Paul was listing the things he had, probably on top of his list was Christ. I have Christ. So let me give thanks for what I already have because he is the source of my strength. What Paul was ultimately saying, many of us quote this verse out of context. I can do all things through Christ. That's what we quote. But Paul was saying it simply means, if you look at verse 12, the verse before it, he says, even in plenty or in lack, it will not change my status. I will still be able to survive. And he says, I can do all this because of who? Christ that gives me strength. I am ready for anything because Christ is my source. I am ready for any season because Christ is with me. I am ready simply because Christ is in me. That's what Paul was ultimately saying in this passage. And look at the verse that he concludes that section that we're reading, verse 19, and he says, and my God will supply all your needs according to his riches in glory. Look at the focus of his life. The focus of his life was not his circumstance or his situation. The focus of his life is the God that he has worshipped. And he said, provided I have the supplier himself, the provider himself, the healer himself, the shalom, the peace himself, that's all that I need. And if I have this, then I have everything. And he's telling us the principle of the inside. Sometimes the things outside us discourage us. Sometimes the things outside us shake us. But if we could only draw our strength, not from our wealth, not from our knowledge, not from our experience, but from our God and our relationship with God and the assurance that we serve a God who is able to provide. Let me conclude with a challenge to us as a church. I want to challenge us as a church to redefine what enough is. Redefine what enough is. Make a decision and redefine what enough is. There's something my wife does every 3 months. She calls it spring cleaning. I call it being mean, okay? Spring cleaning. So what she does is, she comes to me and tells me, Nick, any shirt you have not worn for 2 months goes. It doesn't matter where I got the shirt from. It doesn't matter who gave me the shirt. It doesn't matter how much the shirt is. she would give it away. And that has continued for the past 15. Every 2 months, she just pulls them out without permission. She just pulls them out. And when I get home, she says, those ones are gone. Because we have enough. And our definition for enough is, if I've not worn it in the past month, then I don't need it. Okay, some of us are looking at me, those for. Yes, that's exactly how I looked at her. So, some of you know the reason why I ride my bike every month. So that she doesn't say, no, I gave it away. Because you did not ride it. But that's what she has used as a definition for enough. And the question I want to ask us is, what is your definition of enough? And I want to challenge us as a church to go home to your store, the food that is there, and decide this is enough. This is excess. To go into your closet today, this week, your clothes closet, and open it and say, this is enough. This one goes. To look at your shoes and to be able to say, this is enough. This one goes. To look at your furniture and say, this is enough. This one goes. To look at your parking lot and say, this is enough. This one goes. To look at your property and say, this is enough. And this one goes. To look at your books, for some of you have amassed books for years, and say, this is enough. This one goes. To look at your gadgets and to decide, this is enough. And this one goes. I dare you. I'm not kidding. I dare you to do that and experience freedom like you have never experienced before. You will have let go of the hold of things over your life, and you'll experience a liberty. The hardest part is letting it go. That's the hardest part. And the reason why it's the hardest part is you're breaking one of the greatest powers that has a hold of many people today, the power of materialism. And the minute you let go of it, you will experience such freedom, such satisfaction, and such fulfillment, because you'll have discovered what it means to be content. You will have gotten to the place where you can confidently say, enough is enough. I pray that we get there. I want to challenge you this week to do exactly that. Draw a line in everything that you own. Draw a line and say, this is enough. If you have a place that you can take it, please take it. If you don't have a place to take it, drop it here at the church. We will make sure it gets to somebody that is in need. But let go of it and let it be a blessing to someone else. Shall we bow our heads as we pray? Father, I just want to come before you and thank you for your word. And how these words that Paul wrote years ago are alive and are able to speak to us in our present day situation, even today. Father, I come before you right now, and I want to dedicate us as a congregation to the discovery of enough. I want to ask for confidence and courage in this congregation this week to draw the line and say, this one is enough. And I pray that, Lord, many people will be blessed because we'll have just crossed the line and started our journey of generosity and are being used as a channel and as a tool of blessing to many others. Father, we dedicate and rededicate all that we have to you. And I pray that you give us the confidence to let go of the hold of things and to shift our focus to blindside circumstances and to focus on the inside where Christ is resident and president over our hearts and over our lives. Father, I just want to pray for such a great freedom upon us as we obey your word and we practice what it means to say enough. And I just want to pray that this freedom will continue as a fresh breath in our lives, where we declutter our lives from accumulating stuff and things and consider ourselves a channel of blessing and not a dam to hold in and to contain God's blessings. Father, I just want to pray for a spirit of courage and a strength upon us to draw that line this week and allow us to be an agent of blessing to many others. Father, we thank you and we praise you, for it's in Jesus' precious name.